Obviously, the election represents an extraordinary mandate for change and a repudiation of one-party misrule in Washington. Before the campaign began, Americans had already turned against the signature Bush initiatives, the war in Iraq, the trickle-down economic agenda, the privatization of Social Security, the right-wing social agenda as represented by Terry Schiavo and stem cell research. In this election, Republicans went into the election facing an angry electorate that was looking for change. Working families under more and more pressure from rising costs and stagnant wages were again looking for a change. On the economy, something that's gotten very little notice in the national press was the remarkably populist temper and tenor of the campaign that Democrats ran in states, both red states and blue states across the country. More money was spent on ads painting big oil and big pharma as a threat to working families than was spent on painting bin Laden as a threat. Corruption was a major concern of voters, but Democrats generally linked corruption to economic bread and butter concerns. Their opponents were in the pocket of big oil and they were paying for it at the gas pump. They were in the pocket of the drug companies. They were paying for it in their prescription drugs. Democrats of all stripes got elected on Tuesday. But for all the talk about the new conservative Democrats coming from conservative districts, the big change in the Senate is the rise of true populist champions. Bernie Sanders from Vermont, Sherrod Brown from Ohio, John Tester, Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota. Bob Casey and Claire McCaskill also owe their election victories in large part to their appeal based on economic populist issues. These new senators will change the discussion at the national level, particularly on issues of trade and economic policy. And everybody should understand that is the big sea change in the Senate that will take place at the end of this election. Also, I think a lot of the Democrats who have been elected from conservative districts have been mischaracterized as conservatives. In 15 districts, according to the steelworkers, fair trade advocates displaced those who had voted for free trade accords. As populism rose in prominence, conservatism went into hiding. And I suggest to you that that means the election involves more than a sweeping rejection of the one-party rule in Washington, but rather it marks the end of a conservative era that began in 1980.
When you look at this data, it is hard not to look at it and say that the conservative political world crystallized by Bush has crashed in this election. If the Democrats have an immense opportunity, and progressives have an immense opportunity to look at what's been shattered here and say we can open up new space. And this was achieved, frankly, without an alternative worldview. Number one story is Iraq. But then you get to two sets of issues that have kind of a comparable strength. One are the economic issues that center around middle-class living standards and cost issues related to health care and energy prices. And then there's a set of issues related to ethics and special interests. What you see here is the standing of the Republican Party, not necessarily in terms of party identification, but in terms of party image. Lowest point in the history of polling and you'll see it reflected here over a couple-year period, but we have the time series going back to the post-World War II period. The Republican Party has not have this low a standing at any point. And its standing went down during the course of this election. But it also reflects a crash of both parties.
There's no question that Iraq was the predominant issue in this election. President Bush gave voters a choice of his way or the highway, and people chose the highway. People weren't just vaguely wanting a change on Iraq. They wanted something very specific. They wanted a timeline for exit. And you can tell this because when you ask people who voted for Democrats why they voted for Democrats, they voted, Iraq was the #1 issue. If you ask them what they thought Democrats were going to do, it was this very specific thing about an exit strategy with a timeline. I guess it was early 2006. We were thinking about the ground game and thinking, okay, Karl Rove has a 72-hour plan. What do we do? We came up with a 96-hour plan 24 more hours. We actually had more people involved in 2006 than in 2004. There was more energy in this campaign than there was in the 2004 campaign, which was something that none of us ever expected.